Well, everybody has a story. Everybody's story matters. Nobody gets the story they want. But what I want to talk about for a few moments this morning is, why does it seem so important that we tell our stories to somebody else? What is it about telling our story that has the power to heal? And so I got to bring somebody else on that I talk about my story with pretty much every day. And that's Dr. Rick. Rick, it's good to see you. And from your perspective, it's a good thing nobody gets the story they want, because that gives you a job.
It kind of does. That's a very good point. Everybody that comes in some ways, having some part of their story that they did not want. I love that little tagline that you've been using, John.
Well, and I was thinking about
really
in the New Testament where Paul says, bear each other's burdens. And that as we do that, as we bear each other's burdens, we're helping to fulfill the law of Christ to love each other. But then just thinking about why is it? I was in a meeting not too long ago and somebody was talking about she was creating a place. And in this case, it was for other women leaders in the church to be able to tell their stories. And they needed a space to do that. And everybody in the room immediately nodded their heads. We all get that. But the question is why? Because we understand it in the abstract, I think. But then when I think about my story, often I don't want to tell it. So your job pretty much is for people to come to you and tell you their stories. What is it about the very act of telling a story that can bring healing to a soul?
I've been thinking about that question throughout your series. Again, that line of having a storyline that you didn't necessarily want.
Yeah.
And it made me think about a really kind of very fast little lecture I heard once on trauma. Go through a trauma. It turns out human beings can be traumatized in so many different ways, whether they're in war or abuse or an airplane crash, or there's just so many ways. And essentially, this lecture goes like this. There's three basic symptoms if you've been traumatized, if you've had a story that involved trauma, and two parts to healing from the trauma. The three symptoms are psychological numbing. You go numb. Secondly, hyperarousal, like supersonic sensitivity to
Yes.
stimulation and pain and trauma. And then the third one is technically re-experiencing symptoms. I think of it as triggerability. So if you had a hard storyline in some way that qualifies as a trauma, and so many of us have had that in some way, shape, or form, then you always have those three symptoms, or sometimes I'll think of them as sort of umbrellas, three umbrellas with lots of subcategories under them.
So numbing, and then kind of hypervigilance, and then being able to be triggered to re-experience it. It's funny. I know that word is used a lot. Be an interesting question. Why does trauma seem to be talked about a lot more in our day than it did, 20 or 30 years ago? But I know for us, for me, going through the hardest time of life, for sure, there'd be moments in there where things felt so sensitive that if Nancy got a text and she was looking at her phone, immediately I would say, what is it? Is there something else that's going on? And I remember somebody saying to me at one point, boy, this is like having PTSD. And my response was, not at all. This is like TSD. I'm waiting for the P. Like when it gets to be post-trauma, that sounds really good to me. This is just TSD. So I'll bet you for most of us, those symptoms at some level or another would be pretty relatable.
And I so remember them going through that with you.
Yeah.
That's that hypervigilance.
Yeah.
And when I have had tough stories, I just really relate to that too. And in some ways, it's a handhold to kind of normalize, like if I've been traumatized, this will be my experience. Yeah. And it's not meant to be a hint of despair, but this is just how it works on us. And then the two parts of healing, the technical words are integration and differentiation. And the integration part is what gets at the heart of the question that you're asking. Why is it so important to tell our story? So it turns out that people who do heal from a traumatic past or a traumatic part of their story benefit from integrating the story in their
Mm.
life. And what's more disintegrating is when you repress the story or don't tell the
Mm.
story or button your lip about the story or go quiet or go too internal
Mm.
with the story. So to tell the story, I usually describe this part of the trauma healing
Mm-hmm.
as becoming fluent with your own story.
Oh gosh, that's great.
Become fluent in a language. And if you aren't fluent with your story, not to beat it to death, I don't think that way. And
Mm-hmm.
we talked together. I'm not a big like parent blamer, and I'm not looking to enable people to camp out in some victim position, even honestly when they've been victimized.
Yeah.
That doesn't end up being flourishing and thriving for us. But to become fluent with a story, to tell it to an attentive person or persons, to go over the details, to spend time taking in and sharing how it impacted you, what happened, what the feelings are, how other people responded. It's remarkable to me. And you're
Mm.
right, my story, my job, I've always liked story. You and I have mentioned
Yeah.
before that we connected over our love of literature and story. And I think that means in a way I have a perfect job is I get to listen in such a deep way to these stories. And nobody's story, this is probably not something that, I don't know if you've been saying this, nobody's story is exactly alike either.
Oh
Every
gosh,
story
yeah.
is different.
Yeah.
Every story has parts of it that, you didn't want. And I've just been
Mm.
reflecting on that. And what do we do with the parts of our story
Mm.
that we didn't want? Well, one of the things that we do is we tell that part of the
Mm.
story. Again, not in a complaining sort of way, but to become, this is just my metric, like my measure, to become fluent with my story
Mm-hmm.
is one of the very significant parts of being able to get past the story. And then the differentiation word means that I look forward,
Mm.
that move away from the past and move into the future. Sort of a that was then, that's what happened to me then, and this is now. Be able to live in the moment and move into tomorrow.
Mm.
That's the differentiation part. Um, so it's so interesting to see always in every traumatic story, John, those same three symptoms or
Mm.
different manifestations, and then these same two parts. Um, and it's fascinating. Even if you told your story, something will happen, some kind of new
Yep.
triggering
Yep.
will happen, and you'll need to tell the story again. When I
Mm.
think of going through hard parts of my story, you and I are close enough. I'm sure that I've retold you different parts of the hard parts of
Mm-hmm.
my story.
Yep.
And you're such a good friend. You don't seem to get bored. You don't tell me, oh, I've heard that already. Let's just
Well,
talk about something else.
I was wondering if maybe an indicator of that lack of what was the second kind of decision to be able to move forward that you're talking about, where you face the future?
Just, I'm not sure what you mean, but just looking into the sort of that was then and this is now.
Yeah, you
Just
were
like
saying
that
you have to integrate when you tell the story. That you integrate it, and then you're able to differentiate. You're able to
differentiate. I'm sorry, to
separate from it
differentiate the
and look
present.
forward. And I was wondering if an indicator of a lack of that would be if a person feels so stuck in retelling their story, like a record. For many of you listening right now, there used to be these black wax things called records when Rick and I were kids. And it was possible for a needle to get stuck in the groove, so you just hear the same thing over and over and over again. And if a person is stuck, like a needle on a record used to be, and you have to listen to that, you would find yourself getting kind of irritated or frustrated or bored. That might be an indicator. If I found myself getting frustrated, irritated, or bored, that you were a little bit stuck. It's never felt like that to me. It's felt like as we've talked it through, um, as you're going forward in life, you'll want to seek to keep moving, but there will be times when this reminder comes and you need to talk about that again. And that always feels to me kind of like we're on holy ground.
And, there might be some active steps. I just recommended, you remember the series that you did on forgiveness a while back?
Yeah.
There might be some active steps that you can take to further that differentiation process. And that's the one that immediately comes to my mind, is there may be some forgiveness and that whole reach paradigm that you shared with us. And even that paradigm had you recalling what had happened, so telling the story. Do you remember that? And then what do you do when the story comes back up? And I remember you talking about reminding yourself, oh yeah, I decided to forgive in that particular story. It's not the only piece of differentiation, but often that would be a very significant piece.
Yeah, and it's interesting thinking about that, how important memory is. I was thinking in a real dark time, a helpful thing for me was when I found out about this technique called expressive writing, where the idea is whatever it was that felt traumatic to you, whether or not you think it deserves the T word, for 4 consecutive days, you take 20 minutes and you write about it, and you really focus on what did I feel as it was going on. And it's important to limit it to 20 minutes. That way your mind knows that you're not going to be stuck in it forever. Writing is helpful because it lets you move on. You can think and perseverate and just spin. When you write, it tends to kind of limit it. And I got done with doing that 4 days in a row. And it was like, man, I'm not done yet. So I had to do another 4 days. Then when you were talking about Ev Worthington, that's a different kind of recalling. Ev would say when you're going to forgive somebody, you recall that difficult event. But instead of just focusing on my own feelings, you recall it from the way that an objective journalist or a historian would do.
Right.
And I never thought until you mentioned it right now. Those are two different ways of recalling or remembering. Both can be useful. Both can be important.
And again, it just testifies to some of the action steps that we can take. When you mention writing, I've long felt that people will sometimes benefit by putting something on the paper. They have more ability to get distance from it if they named it and talked about it. And you have to be a writer to like that. Also, other spiritual practices like surrendering a difficult story to the Lord, allowing the Lord to be present with you, even in the recalling of that story. So it turns out there's a lot of different pieces to the differentiation process.
Yeah, no, when I think about it, as you put it like that, really the Psalms, when you think about the book of Psalms, in many ways, that's a whole book of the psalmist, whoever wrote any given psalm, surrendering his or her story to the Lord. And sometimes it can be joyful. Lots of times it's not. It involves lots of anger and lots of sadness and lots of fear. But that's probably a great place for folks to go that are wondering, how do I tell my story to God?
No, that whole idea, our buddy Rankin, when he talked that one time about the Psalms teach us to own our feelings, but not enthrone them. It's got a little bit of that same feel, that you're not at all shy about what you really feel. And yet in the structure of so many, especially of those negative emotion Psalms, you're starting to turn that feeling over to the Lord that's just so good.
Rankin Wilborn is a wonderful writer and thinker and teacher on that stuff. So today, if there's pain in your life, you just might think about, do you find yourself experiencing a numbing of your feelings, try to escape or use alcohol or something else to distract yourself? And do you find yourself hyper vigilant, sensitive? Are you easily triggered where you re-experience it again? And the invitation is, tell your story. Find somebody that you trust and tell it to them, surrender it to God, so that you are able to move forward. Rick, this has been so rich. Thank you very much.
Oh, so fun, John. Always such a pleasure. Thank you.
Yep. We all have a story. God wants to redeem yours.
Hey, if you enjoyed that video, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any future teachings from John Ortberg here at Become New. My name's Tim, and I'm a part of the team here. This series is all about stories, Everybody has a story, and everybody's story matters. And we want to know about your story, whether it's a story of coming to faith or a story of spiritual growth. Whatever it is, we're here for you. You can email that to us at connect@becomenew.com, or you can text it to us. You can also sign up for daily reminders whenever we drop a new video via text by texting the word BECOME to the number 855-888-0444. You can also send us prayer requests there. There's a team of us that meet to pray each weekday for viewers just like yourself. If you'd like to receive the emails that go along with each video, be sure to check that out at becomenew.com/subscribe. More than a video to watch, this is really a community to belong to, and we're so glad that you're a part of it. We'll catch you next time.